Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about happiness. Happiness is one of those things that people would say is an essential or possibly even a human right. But is it? What does it mean? And should it be something that we aim for in our lives? Dougal, can you give us the dictionary definition of happiness?
Happiness is a noun. It's the state or quality of being happy, which then means we need to get a definition of happy, which is a feeling or showing pleasure or contentment.
In that definition, it's got the word contentment, which you often think is either happy or content.
Yes, not necessarily that there's a juxtaposition there, that either you have pleasure or you have contentment, and that they're different things.
But really, they're both feelings. Possibly contentment is a longer lasting, slightly deeper feeling, but both feelings.
And one of the key things is that feelings are fleeting. They come and they go, but are they something to build a life on?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if you were to ask what is your aim in life, or particularly with your children, for example, if you were to say what do you want for your children, a lot of people would say, I want them to be happy.
Yes.
And I think we base our lives on our feelings of whether or not we're happy. And if we do that, then it tends towards selfishness.
It's very deeply ingrained in our culture as well. I think a lot of it comes from the US Constitution, being inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I've never liked the pursuit of happiness being in there because I don't think it's a right.
It seems a bit ephemeral as well to be a right.
Yes. And I guess I've always viewed happiness as A, as a feeling, but B, there's signposts. It's not the end goal. It's merely a signpost along the way.
So we talked about the US Constitution and the pursuit of happiness, but the Founding Fathers got their ideas from...
Well, they got them from John Locke. He wrote 2 treatises of government, and in his work he refers to life, health, liberty, or possessions. Now, there's a few differences between the way Locke's treating things and the way the US Constitution's treating things, but it's interesting that they took out those words health and possessions and they put in happiness instead. And it changes the meaning quite dramatically.
It does. I think Locke's also coming at it from a legal standpoint, something that you can have legal protections for.
Correct, he is. When you read more around what he says within that passage, you're right, he's talking about legal rights
and protections. And so it might be good to have protections for possessions and for your health. We've wanted legal protections for health over the last few years. But as far as the US Constitution's going, they're looking at them as rights, God-given, inalienable rights. And I don't think you have a right to happiness.
No.
Because then it puts the responsibility for your happiness onto somebody else. And we're actually each responsible for our own attitude, our own feelings and
this is a lot of where the problems of wokery and intersectionality come out, because people are basically saying I have the right to be happy or to not be made uncomfortable, and therefore if you say something I don't like and it makes me unhappy, that's your fault because you've breached my rights.
But that's making somebody responsible for your feelings.
It's making someone else responsible for your own feelings, which is not fair, because they have no control over that. Whereas you do have control over your feelings, and you do have control over how you react.
And it's not practical to put the responsibility for your feelings on someone else.
Well, it ends up becoming a contest, a race to the bottom of who can be the most offended. Because part of the problem there is that I don't know what's going on in your head. You don't know what's going on in my head. So no one can, when you say I'm offended by that, no one can actually refute it. It's an irrefutable statement. And that's problematic because they could be making it up.
Well, it's only problematic if you then put the blame on the other person. You can be offended, but if that's my responsibility, that's when we have an issue.
Yes.
Because like you say, it's a race to the bottom.
But that leads us to people need to be taking responsibility for their own happiness.
Yes. And they do say that that is the one thing that you can control, that you are in full control of, is your attitude towards things that occur in your life.
And a lot of that is, and I'll link it back to a previous statement about happiness being the signposts. The way in which you choose that is by delving into your purpose. And once you have an understanding of where you're going, then happiness will give you the signposts to tell you whether you're getting there or not.
Well, I think then you've got to be very careful about whether or not your purpose is selfish and about fulfilling your own desires, needs, wants.
You could misuse it if you have the wrong, and you could have the wrong purpose and end up chasing selfishness or goals that hurt other people around you. Absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes down to whether or not things are, well, it intersects upon what's a first principle. And I don't think happiness is a first principle. I think something like wisdom or justice, some of those virtues that we've talked about in other previous podcasts, they're the primary purpose that we ought to be seeking after, not something like happiness. That's not to diss happiness. It has its place, it has its purpose, but it's not the ends.
So Dennis Prager says you have a moral imperative to be happy. And
yes,
I kind of see that as about adopting a positive attitude towards things in life. It's not about like, I'm always going to feel happy.
Yes.
But it's about controlling your attitude. And
well, he actually says, even if you don't feel happy, you should act happy. And this kind of links into the Romans actually had one of their virtues, because again, I mentioned in previous podcasts, they had a big long list of lots of different virtues. And one of the public virtues was happiness. And that comes back to what Dennis Prager is saying, is that either you can be spreading positivity or you could be spreading negativity. And his argument is that you have a moral imperative obligation to spread good cheer rather than bad cheer.
So if you were to take happiness as a first principle, what would that look like?
There, I would look at the book of Ecclesiastes. It's one of the oldest philosophical works that we have. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, a bunch of different things that you can make your purpose or your goal are contemplated. Material goods, pleasure is one of them, or happiness is one of them. And the key conclusion of Ecclesiastes is basically that it's meaningless. And the reason for happiness is that it's fleeting, is that you go out and you have a good time, but at the end of the day, what do you then have? It's your good times are past and then you have to face the next day. And so the classic line from Ecclesiastes is meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And the key takeaway there is that it's not a first principle, therefore you have to look at other things to provide your meaning and purpose.
So we're taking ownership of our feelings and taking ownership of our levels of happiness. I find it helpful to look back at what you might want for your children, because I think we can have a little bit of perspective where this is somebody that we're completely invested in and passionately want the best for. And when you look at what you want for your children, like we discussed earlier, a lot of people would say they want happiness. But that's not something I wish for my children. I hope for them to be kind people. And yes. I know that that has a lot of negative connotations from the last few years, but I'd like to reclaim that word to its true meaning
yes.
of actually true kindness. And I would like my children to be kind, and I would like them to be wise.
Yes.
And for me, those two things are about becoming a person of character. I want that for myself. I want that for my children. And if we work at becoming people of character, we can enjoy those moments of happiness.
Yes.
And we can choose to be more joyful, happy people.
And what you will find is that those moments of happiness, when you have aligned your purpose with one of these first principles, that those moments of happiness will point you in the direction of more of those first principles. So if it's wisdom, when you have an experience that you learn something from, that'll actually give you some joy, because you can sit back and go, oh, well, I've learned something there. Maybe I've just that incy-wincy little bit wiser about things.
Well, I think happiness has just made me think happiness is a habit.
It is a habit.
The more you do it, the more those moments are going to come.
Yes.
And I think that's a good way to approach our lives, is practicing and cultivating becoming happy, joyful people. It's almost the blossom where you're planted principle. So
Yes.
if you're choosing happiness, the more you practice it, you're choosing to be happy or peaceful or content and joyful in whatever situation you find yourself in.
Yeah, so you might have wanted to be an All Black when you're younger. That's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that forever you're going to be miserable.
Well, you have a choice about that, I think.
You can choose to
And
move
you do
on.
see people who become bitter because life didn't turn out how they planned.
Yeah.
So happiness, we've come to realise, is a choice. And if we're on the pathway of becoming people of moral fibre and character, happiness is going to signpost that for us, and we can choose our feelings.
It's not that we're saying be miserable. That would be a wrong interpretation. We're saying treat it for what it is, a signpost, not a destination, and that you have to have the right destination, otherwise the signpost will send you in the wrong direction.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe.